What's up, and welcome into Fantasy Baseball today. Frank, Scott, and Chris all here on Tuesday, February 27th. Today on the show, we're focusing on strategy in each of the major formats: Roto, head-to-head points, and head-to-head categories. How do we approach each of those formats, and which players get a boost in a categories league versus a points league? You probably heard us kind of make reference to some of those players before, but of course, we will list them off a little bit later on. But first, the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational, TGFBI, is up and running. For anyone who follows us on Twitter or follows any fantasy baseball player on Twitter, you probably have seen some draft boards started or heard about this on podcasts somewhere. Shout out to Justin Mason, who puts these together every single year, a collection of 15-team Roto industry leagues. We're all in different leagues. You compete in your individual league, but also there's an overall prize as well. Scott is drafting first overall in his league. Chris is drafting 9th, and I am drafting 14th. So we are spread out. Scott got to draft Ronald Acuna. That was awesome.
Yep.
And then he completely changed his entire draft strategy. What happened, Scott?
What happened was other people are drafting too, and they don't always cooperate with my plan. So yeah, Ronald Acuna, I got him number 1. Obviously, that was the most obvious pick you could make. I was the happiest moment of my week, finding out that I had the first pick in the draft. But nobody took pitchers in round 2. They took hitters. I mean, the top 3, of course, Spencer Strider, Garrett Cole, Corbin Burns went. This is a 15-team league, worth pointing out. So it's not. It's deeper than the formats we usually talk about. And so I thought, starting pitchers tend to get pushed up in that, the high end ones, in those deeper formats, because obviously they deplete faster when you have 3 more teams. And it didn't happen. And by the time it came back to me at the end of round 2, the 2-3 turn, picks 30 and 31, the top hitters available were Jose Altuve and Gunnar Henderson. Now, I like Altuve a lot. And in a 12-team league, or if I was picking in the middle of the draft, I would have just taken Altuve with one of my 2 picks. As for Gunnar Henderson, I don't think I could justify taking him over Zach Wheeler and Kevin Gausman, who are the 2 players I ultimately took. In part because, again, 30 picks till I'm picking again. I'm seeing at the top of the draft board nothing but pitchers. I'm like, oh shoot, this pitcher run is coming. It's going to get back to me in round 4, and I'm going to end up with like Justin Steele as my ace, and I'm probably going to have to reach for him to do that. And the 15-team mocks I'd done up to this point, I had lived through the frustration, the disappointment of not being able to fill out the pitching staff the way I'm used to. So I decided I'll nip this in the bud. I'll take Zach Wheeler and Kevin Gausman, not worry about pitching for a while. Hopefully I can get somebody like Adolis Garcia as my second hitter here when it comes back to me at the 4-5 term. People just kept drafting hitters. They just kept drafting hitters. So the top of the draft room is still pitchers, and we're like 6 picks away from my 4th pick. And so my number 2 hitter is going to end up being somebody like Nolan Jones or Mike Trout. Mike Trout is probably who I do. Or who else is there?
I think you mentioned Royce Lewis.
Royce Lewis. Yeah. They're going to end up being my second hitter.
It's tough, man. The 15-teamers. Ugh.
Yeah.
Drafting on the end.
This is the downside to taking Acuna, I guess, is like you kind of end up in no man's land in rounds 2 and 3.
Yeah, but like think about it this way.
What everybody else is going to do.
Think about it this way. Take 10 homers away from Ronald Acuna, take 35 steals away from him, and give them to Royce Lewis. And
I mean, that's true. I mean,
Ronald Acuna's got some production to spare.
Acuna has so much production in all the categories that, I mean, just from a balancing category standpoint, it kind of makes sense to go heavy at pitcher after you draft Ronald Acuna. But still, man.
And for what it's worth, a lot of people are posting their draft boards, and I've seen a lot of Acuna pitcher. In my league, the person who had the number 1 pick went Acuna, Wheeler, Gausman. We aren't nearly as close to their 4th pick, so I don't know who's going to be available, but that kind of seems to be in the parlance of our times, the meta.
Yeah, and I shared this on Twitter. At the moment I made the pick, and a lot of smart fantasy people commented. I know Fred Zinke commented, and they said, yeah, I mean, based on what was there, you really had no choice but to take the 2 pitchers. I think I did have a choice. I could have taken a pitcher and Altuve.
Yeah.
But those were the only 2 choices.
And I'm a little surprised that you didn't, Scott. I know you love Jose Altuve. I get the rationale for why you did it, but yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem. When you play in a league that deep and you draft on the end, sometimes you almost feel like you have to reach to get the player you want because it's like 30 picks away until it comes back to you. So I'm kind of feeling that. On the other side, I'm picking 14th. But Chris, how did you start your TGFBI so far?
So I had the number 9 pick, and I, we've talked about it a little bit, but I had the realization that if you can't get the number 1 pick, I feel like 8 or 9, and I'd probably feel more like this in a 12-team league, but 8 or 9 feels like a pretty good spot to be in, just because you're probably not going to get the big stolen base source, which is a bit of a struggle, but
I'd miss that myself.
You're going to get a player who is a viable top 2 talent if you're picking 8 or 9. Like, maybe Freddie Freeman isn't the number 2 player, and that's who I picked, number 9 overall. Maybe he's not the number 2 overall player. I don't think he is for anybody, probably. But, like, if Freddie Freeman does what he did last season, I think he was the number 2 player in fantasy, wasn't he?
I think it was Was he ahead of Olsen?
No, Olsen was the number 2 player.
Okay, number 2.
I think Freeman's been number 3 overall in Roto each of the last 2 years. A different first baseman was ahead of him, Goldschmidt.
I think the key there between Matt Olson and Freddie Freeman is Freddie Freeman didn't have to hit 55 home runs to be the number 3 overall player. So I started with Freddie Freeman at number 9. I would have loved to have taken Corbin Burns if he had come back to me. Unfortunately, he went 1 spot ahead of me. So I did go with Francisco Lindor. It was down between him and Rafael Devers with that pick. Rafael Devers ended up slipping a couple more spots. He went like 24th overall, which is great value for Rafael Devers. And then coming back to me in the 3rd round, I got Scott's boy, Jose Altuve, at 39th overall. So Freddie Freeman, Francisco Lindor, Jose Altuve. It's old.
It's pretty good. I like
it. But that's pretty good. Yeah, that feels like I don't have a huge steal source so far, but I got some steals.
You got more than me.
Lindor, right?
Yeah, I got a 25-ish steals from Lindor.
You got 45 to 50 between Altuve and Lindor, probably.
That's a decent start. I can't just forget about steals from now on.
You might have 65 steals.
Yeah. I did consider taking a starting pitcher there, and we'll see how the rest of the draft goes, because I would really like it if I could go. Like, I thought about taking Tyler Glasnow there. And this is where that 15-team league comes in, because I don't love Tyler Glasnow. We've talked about it a lot. I think there's a lot of risk there, but he certainly can perform like an ace. And, there's not a ton of those left. And so I'm hoping Yoshi Yamamoto is there the next time I pick. If Glasnow's there, I'd happily take him, but I think that's unlikely at 52nd overall. And, I'd love to pair one of those with like a Logan Webb or Framber Valdez in the next round, but that might be asking a little too much.
Yeah, that seems a little far-fetched. I think you'll get one of those SP1s that you're looking for. I mean, I don't know if Yamamoto will be there in the 4th. You probably will get one of Logan Webb or Framber Valdez, but
I would be shocked if one of them wasn't there, at least.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I was picking 14th, and the plan going in was, with one of these picks, I wanted to get Bryce Harper. He's the hitter I love. Obviously, I'm very excited about him this year. I did wind up getting him. I wanted to pair him with like Ohtani or Jose Ramirez, give myself a little bit of a steals base there. But Ohtani went before my pick. He went 12th. Trey Turner went 1 pick before. So I'm sitting there, and I took Bryce Harper with my 1st round pick, hoping all right, well, I could get Jose Ramirez, hopefully, or even Yordan Alvarez, whatever. I can get an outfielder with a lot of pop. All right, I could worry about speed later on. Both of those guys went at the turn. So now at this point, I have to decide, do I take Matt Olson and just double tap first base, which is just such a weird start in a league this deep where you need...
It's tough.
Yeah, it is. So I thought about Lindor. I thought about Albies for some speed. And ultimately, I wound up taking Austin Riley. So I don't know if that's the right answer. I think maybe someone like CJ Abrams will be in play for me at the end of the third if he's still there to try and grab some steals. But honestly, I just wanted the highest floor guy. I wanted a little bit better batting average. And so that's why I went with Austin Riley. But I don't know if that's right. So we'll see.
I think I would have gone Olsen. Yeah. I mean, I probably wouldn't have gone Harper in round one. I'd have been more likely to go Olsen there. But yeah, I think I would have done the 2 first basemen. In a 15-team Roto league, I'm kind of less concerned about filling positions because it's hard to feel like you have a starter that you actually feel good about at every position in a Roto league this deep.
The person picking 15th in my league did go Olsen Harper to start. And I'm interested to see what it looks like. Now, it helps that it's a Roto league, so you do have that corner infield spot. You're not filling up your utility yet. So that's I think a key there.
Right.
What didn't help was that nobody, I guess kind of similar to Scott's league, nobody wanted to take Garrett Cole. He just fell and fell. He went at pick 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22.
Wow. He went 10th in mine.
He went to the team that got Soto in the first round. So started Soto, Garrett Cole. So yeah, like if someone would have taken him in the first, that would have helped push down another hitter for me. Yeah. So that didn't work out. Chris, if you took Bryce Harper at pick 14, who would you have taken in the second round? Would you have like Lindor, Albies, Olsen?
Was Jose Ramirez there?
No, he was gone.
Okay, it was gone. Was Aaron Judge there?
Gone.
Okay.
It was a weird spot, man. Didn't
Trey
love
Turner?
It. Gone.
Huh. I guess were there any starting pitchers in the first round of yours?
Strider.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would have gone. I think I have Olsen. I have Olsen ahead of Riley, so I would have gone with him. But yeah, it's weird to fill a corner infield spot that early.
Anywho, that's where we're at. Yeah, go ahead.
By the way, Jose Altuve went 47th in my league. So I was picking 30, 31, thinking he was the best hitter at that point, and he went 47th.
I felt good about getting him at 39.
I wouldn't mind it if he fell to me at the end of the third round. So who knows? Maybe that'll be in play as well. All right, so that's TGFBI. You'll be hearing about it on this podcast, other podcasts as well. But there you go. That's how each of us started up our respective drafts. Real quick before we get into Roto strategy, that's a pretty flawless transition talking about TGFBI. But real quick, to join our Fantasy Baseball Today Facebook group, if you haven't already, that's facebook.com/groups/fantasy baseball today. You can hop in there, ask any questions that you have, draft strategy, keepers, dynasty, whatever it might be, and to download and follow our 5-minute podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, wherever you listen to this podcast. Let's talk Roto strategy. Roto, also known as rotisserie or 5x5, the most traditional way to play fantasy baseball. Normally, you have 10 categories: 5 hitting, batting average, home runs, runs scored, RBI, and stolen bases, and the 5 pitching categories: wins, strikeouts, ERA, whip, and saves. Obviously, here you want to rank highly in as many of those categories as you possibly can. The starting lineup does go a bit deeper: 2 catchers, 1 of each infield spot, 5 outfielders, 1 corner, 1 middle, 1 utility bat, and 9 pitcher spots. You could divvy that up however you want. Usually it's 6 starting pitchers, 3 relievers, or 7 starting pitchers, 2 relievers. And like Chris recently mentioned, you want to shoot for 3rd place or better in each category. That's just kind of like a starting point. I think it's something that you should be, if you're tracking your projections or you have category targets, I think that's what you should be looking for. We'll get to that in just a second. Scott, we'll start with you. General strategy when drafting in a Roto league, and has it changed at all this year?
General strategy is to balance the categories. So I guess the distinctions, what makes my approach to Roto this year different from past years? I don't know if that's where you want me to start, but that's where I'm going to start. Is there are more stolen bases available. You need more to be competitive, but there are more available. There is more. I think in Roto, there's actually more, based on the player pool this year, more urgency to take high-end starting pitchers. Because if you get into that glob in Roto League, if you get into that unpredictability in ERA and WHIP, that's going to hurt you a lot more in that format than it will in a points league, where a pitcher can have an unappetizing ERA WHIP and still give you a nice point total. So you have to be a little more conscientious about drafting a high-end pitcher or two. Not that you have to take one with your first 3 picks necessarily. I've said before, I want 4 of my top 35 or so, ideally. But I think you have to be more conscientious about it in Roto League because you're guarding those ratios, and the glob is going to hurt ratios the most. That's what it's that's its destructive nature, is to come for your ratios. So and as far as balancing home runs and steals, that's always a goal in Roto. Like I said, the ratio of steals to home runs, it's more even than it's been in a long time. And so it's not, you're not required to reach for steals as much, I guess I would say. They are available in high numbers in basically all stages of the draft. If it gets on the later end and you don't have much of a foundation yet, well, you're probably too late. You need to work to build it up as the draft goes. But they're available in all stages of the draft, where in recent years it seemed like it was almost to such an extreme that everybody just drafted base stealers until all the base stealers were gone. Mm-hmm. That's not the way anymore. I will say, though, at the top of the draft, between Ronald Acuna, Bobby Witt, Julio Rodriguez, and Corbin Carroll, whatever order you want to put them, obviously Acuna would be number 1. But those 4 players, that is a caliber of player that, for most of the time we've all been playing fantasy, hasn't really existed. They're capable of giving you the steals numbers they are, with the production that good in all the other categories. I mean, you have to go back to like the 80s, like the dawn of fantasy baseball, to find players who could do that. And we have 4 here this year who could do that. So I do think how you build your team and how much you emphasize stolen bases is going to make a big difference if you're drafting in the first 4 or 5 picks, or if you're not. If you're not, then that might be an occasion to take Ellie De La Cruz or CJ Abrams. If you know you're picking toward the end, you got like Jordan Alvarez and Matt Olson with your first 2 picks, no steals basically. But there are options. There are options, is my point. You'd rather be at the front, so you don't have to make the unfortunate choice to go with CJ Abrams in late round 3, early round 4. But thankfully, somebody like CJ Abrams exists, because that's not something we could say for most of the time we've been playing fantasy.
The thing I would add regarding like whether you need to pay up for stolen bases or not, and the fact that they are easier to find throughout the draft, it's also worth keeping in mind that among the hitting categories, stolen bases are the only one that just exist on their own. Mm-hmm. It's not technically true. You have to get a hit most of the time to get a stolen base. A stolen base probably marginally increases a batter's chances of scoring a run in that opportunity, but on the whole, stolen bases stand apart. And what you see last year, or what you see in the results from last year, I took a look at the average team that won every CBS fantasy league last season. And that the average team that won their league last year had 10.7 category points in runs, 11 in home runs. So they finished in second place on average in home runs, and 10.3 in RBI. For batting average, it was 9.4. Makes sense. A high batting average doesn't necessarily help you in home runs, RBI, and runs. It can, but Luis Arias exists. And stolen bases 9.5 also makes sense. They stand by themselves. So if you have to prioritize one thing, home runs are the thing you should prioritize. They have the highest correlation pretty much every year with winning your fantasy league, but it doesn't guarantee it, and you can't just ignore stolen bases either.
Let's take our first break. When we return, I have the categories, the targets that you mentioned, Chris, what you needed to finish on average third place in each of the categories from last season. So we'll go over that, and we'll do it right after this.
Wake up to football highlights and news from around the world with the one and only Morning Footy team.
Rise and shine, football fans. Welcome to Morning Footy.
Start your all-day football craze with Morning Footy, part of the all-new Golazo Network.
Welcome back in, continuing on with some Roto strategy. And here's what you needed on average to finish third place in 12-team Roto leagues on CBS last season. A 264 batting average, 1,010 runs scored, 295 home runs, 977 RBI, and 185 steals. Per player, you're looking at 72 runs scored, 21 homers, 70 RBI, 13 steals, which doesn't sound like a lot, but once you start factoring in catchers, fourth and fifth outfielders, it gets a little bit tougher than you think. So do you guys, Chris, we'll start with you this time. Do you track projected stats at all while you're drafting in a Roto league? Or I know some people use draft software that kind of keeps track of those things for them. Is there a way that you track your projected stats, or is it just kind of a feel thing for you?
I think it's reasonable not to. I don't think you should track your projected stats. That's tough. I think probably not. I generally don't. I have in the past. I would say at this point, I'll try to keep track and just make sure, okay, I'm falling too far behind in one place or the other. But there are a couple of things that you run into, right? One is you're comparing yourself, your unfinished team, to other people's unfinished teams. And you might have 5 hitters and someone else has 9 hitters. And so you're way behind in a bunch of counting stats in a way that's not necessarily reflective of what your team is likely to produce. The other thing is projections tend to be more conservative on the whole. You're not going to have, no projection system is ever going to project Ronald Acuna for 40 homers and 70 stolen bases, even though we know that's something he's capable of. So I think it's okay to compare yourself to other teams at the end and see if you have a weakness, but you certainly shouldn't be beholden to them because it's difficult. One thing I have done is I've created a spreadsheet in the past that had like the average for each position in my spreadsheet, and then I fill in my players' projected stats as I go along, and that way it kind of, okay, I'm ahead of the curve at shortstop, I'm behind at outfield. That's one, but on the whole, I'd say probably not. It's useful to have the category targets, especially I think for the rate stats, so ERA, batting average, and WHIP. But you're going to drop a bunch of the players you draft, and they're going to get hurt, and you're going to make trades. So I think it's easy to become too beholden to them, and I think that's probably a surefire way to play for 6th place in your league.
On the pitching side of things, here's what you needed to finish third place in each category in a 12-team Roto league last year. 89 wins, 1,344 strikeouts, 79 saves, a 3.696 ERA, and a 1.195 WHIP. Per player, that's nearly 10 wins per player, 149 strikeouts. And then for saves, I divided it by 3 because I figure most people are starting 2 to 4 relievers. So you need like 26.3 saves per like 3 reliever spots on your team. That's 3 legit closers, or 2 really good closers and then maybe a half closer or something like that.
To finish where?
To finish third, you needed 79 saves.
Third in saves. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like if you have 3 relievers on your team, 26.3 saves per player. Scott, how do you usually divvy it up? Do you go 6 starting pitchers, 3 relievers, 7 versus 2? What's your usual?
Well, this year I'm trying to go 6 starting pitchers, 3 relievers, 3 relievers specifically who are in line for saves, or at least I think are in line for saves. And I'm glad I can do that again because there are more assurances around the league for saves right now. I need to find the exact count, but I think it's something like 5 teams where we are really just kind of guessing about who their closer is. And most of them are really bad teams who aren't going to have a great closer anyway. So they're not worth putting a high priority on regardless. But most of the teams we care about it, who offer their closer a good chance of getting a high number of saves, most of them, we have a pretty good idea who's closing. So I think it's much easier to get 3 relievers without making a heavy investment in the category, in the saves category again. And I say again, because, 10, 15 years ago, that was kind of the norm. It's just in more recent years where we've gotten away from having a true closer where you really had to stretch just to get 2, much less 3.
Some people might ask, can you punt a category in Roto and win? Everything that we've talked about to this point is balance. Again, you want to rank as highly in every category as you possibly can. The answer is yes. You can punt a category and win. I've done it before. I mean, I've come in last place. What happens then is you basically need to assure that you are top 3 in each of the other 9 categories, or maybe even top 2, depending on how competitive the rest of your league is. So it is possible to do. It's something I would not recommend trying to do in Roto.
To add color to that, last year, the average team that won their league in CBS Sports 12-team leagues had 98.6 category points. That was the average total. If you finish second if you finish second to last in saves, you get 1 category point, right? Or 2 category points.
Okay, go ahead and finish your point. Sorry.
You get 2. Let's say you get 2 category points in saves. That means you've got to average better than a 3rd place finish in every other category.
Yeah,
to win. So it's possible, but there is no margin for error.
Yeah, it is really, really tough. Something you can do in head-to-head categories, but not in Roto.
98 sounds like a lot of points. I don't know if just the kind of Roto leagues we play in are more competitive, maybe as a whole. There are fewer bottom feeders, so the winner doesn't win with as many points. But 98.
Let me make sure I did the math right there. Yeah, 98.6.
I wasn't doubting you. I just, it's not uncommon to win with like 90 points, And so that makes a big difference in terms of, can you get away with punting? And the only 2 categories you would consider punting, not that you'd punt them both on the same team, but either stolen bases or saves. Because those are the ones that are most disconnected from the other stats. Those are the only ones you could even consider punting.
But
I've never gone.
It's really hard to win ERA and WHIP with just starting pitchers. It's really hard. You got to have really good starting pitchers.
Yeah, that's fair. But you might punt saves and have some relievers in there.
Yeah, like relievers
help with your ERA and WHIP.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, I don't recommend punting on a category. You give yourself such a narrow margin for error. You give yourself no room for adjustment as the season is playing out. I've never actually tried it in a Roto league because it just seems totally. It doesn't seem like I could get it to work. I know people have gotten it to work before, but I don't think it's a high probability strategy.
I think the thing to keep in mind, however, and someone in the comments just said this, you can punt saves during your draft. That doesn't mean you're punting saves.
I have done that before. Yeah.
That's I think the key distinction, and that might be more difficult this year when there's less uncertainty at the closer position. But yeah, that's the thing is. There's a difference between punting saves during your draft, which is a perfectly viable strategy, although a higher degree of difficulty one perhaps, and just I'm not going to care about saves. I don't like that. That you cannot do,
and that is the category
you can, but it's hard.
Certainly not in that 15-team Roto league like we're talking about. If any potential save source emerges on the waiver wire, you're going to have to pay out your ear and fab dollars to get them. But if you're in something shallower, like 12 teams or certainly 10 teams, I'm not saying you should avoid drafting any closers. But if you're trying to get closers at a discount and it just keeps not working out, you still have hope of having a decent finish in saves as long as you're playing the waiver wire aggressively when new closer options emerge.
A smart fantasy player once told me, you are going to pay for saves one way or another, either in the draft or it's going to be on Fab, but one way or another, you will wind up paying for saves. Let's wrap up this discussion with which players are better in Roto than in head-to-head points league. So typically ones that are steal specialists or are lacking plate discipline. I think up at the top, we've talked about this, Scott, before, like more than ever before, the first 2 rounds seem more different between the formats than we've seen. Guys like Julio Rodriguez, Bobby Witt, Corbin Carroll, as you mentioned, Fernando Tatis, they all get a slight boost early on in Roto drafts. But then other hitters, too, in the middle rounds, C.J. Abrams, Nolan Jones, Josh Lowe, Jazz Chisholm,
Ellie De La Cruz,
Christian Encarnacion Strand, Ellie De La Cruz, Andres Jimenez, James Outman, Esteury Ruiz. Those are just an example. Those are the most obvious examples, but they gain more value in a Roto or a categories league compared to in a head-to-head points format.
Yeah, the big base stealers, the bad plate discipline guys. You know what? I have an all Roto team. Do you want me to just go through the names real quick?
Sure.
And if you have anything you want to interject, feel free. The catcher for my all Roto team is Yainer Diaz. Bad plate discipline guy, but potentially good batting average. Honorable mention there, Cal Raleigh. First baseman of the all Roto team, Christian Encarnacion Strand. Again, a plate discipline issue there. Honorable mention, Ryan Mountcastle. Second baseman, Andres Jimenez, big base stealer. Honorable mention, Nolan Gorman, for all the strikeouts, not so great in points. Third baseman, Josh Young. Honorable mention is actually Austin Riley. Him and Rafael Devers both take a hit in points leagues relative to Roto, but especially Riley because his plate discipline isn't great. Shortstop, Bo Bichette. Honorable mention, C.J. Abrams, big stolen base guy. Outfield, Luis Robert, Michael Harris, James Outman. Honorable mention, there's Teoscar Hernandez. Starting pitcher is interesting because here you have ratio darlings who may not give you the volume you're looking for in head-to-head points leagues. So the all Roto rotation is Tyler Glasnow, Kodai Senga, Freddie Peralta, Yuri Perez, and Chris Sale. And the relief pitchers are kind of lame. I put Robert Stevenson and Yuki Matsui. Basically, the idea being that you can guess it. You can afford to guess it saves a little more in a Roto league than you can in a points league.
I'd also just note, like, it might be even more like a Jason Adam and Brian Abreu type thing for a Roto, just because those guys have no value in points leagues.
Yeah.
Right. And they're actually in a 15-team league, especially where just having a really useful ratio guy can actually be really helpful when you're, you don't have to chase. The bar for wins and saves is lower in a 15-team league.
One last point I want to make about Roto, because it's unique to this year. Roto, you're typically filling 5 outfield spots. Outfield is the weakest position, whether you're filling 3 outfield spots or 5, but especially in a league where you're filling 5. That is the position you're going to have to prioritize and draft. Basically, you should design every draft this year around your approach to starting pitching and your approach to outfield. And the other positions, you can kind of just let them come to you as they may.
All right, that was Roto Strategy. We'll get to head-to-head in just a little bit. Do want to talk about some news and notes and any spring training standouts from Monday's action. We had a trade. Not the most important trade, but a trade nonetheless. The Twins acquired Manuel Margot, third base prospect Rain Doncone, and cash from the Dodgers in exchange for shortstop prospect Noah Miller. And Margot seems like a pretty clear platoon partner with Matt Wallner in left field for the Twins. And after the trade, the Dodgers signed Kike Hernandez as a bench utility option. My guess is this doesn't really matter much for fantasy, right?
Yeah, I think it gives the Twins a little Byron Buxton insurance and probably a platoon partner at the beginning. But yeah, the prospects that were moved don't seem particularly. I mean, Noah Miller was a comp round pick at one point, but I don't think he's posted even a 700 OPS so far in 3 minor league seasons. So he might have a future in the majors as a utility player, but it doesn't seem like it's as a fantasy relevant one.
All right, Yoshinobu Yamamoto will make his spring debut Wednesday against the Rangers. Reds manager David Bell said that Matt McLain is making good progress with his right oblique. Justin Verlander will ramp up the intensity of his throwing during a bullpen session Tuesday. He's been delayed after his shoulder didn't bounce back well from his offseason throwing program. Tommy Edman is further along on his hitting program from the right side of the plate than the left side, but he remains without a timetable for his spring debut. He's recovering from offseason wrist surgery. We're still about a month away from opening day, but this is something to monitor. It doesn't sound great right now. They said maybe a couple of weeks he can start, live batting practice. He's kind of up against it. We'll see if Tommy Edman could be ready for opening day.
Obviously, Tommy Edman, figures to play more outfield at this point, but they did sign Brandon Crawford today, which I don't know if he's going to start, but anytime a team starts adding guys at this point, you do worry if that's hey, we're not sure this guy's going to be ready situation.
Everything I've read was that it was a backup plan for
Mason
Wynn. But yeah, no, I think it's a fair point.
Yeah.
Edman's
supposed to be the center fielder when he gets back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jarren Duran is expected to make his Grapefruit League debut on Friday. He's been held out to this point as the team eases him back from toe surgery. Yuki Matsui underwent an MRI on his back, which showed inflammation but no structural damage. This is something worth monitoring because, if he's not ready for opening day, that might make things a little bit more clearer there for Robert Suarez in the Padres bullpen. The Cubs signed Garrett Cooper to a minor league contract with an invitation to spring training, which has already started. So get there, Garrett Cooper. Spring training standouts from Monday. Michael Harris was batting sixth in the Braves lineup. That looked a lot like their opening day lineup. It was missing Sean Murphy, but I thought that was kind of interesting. And, if we continue to see that, and maybe we boost up Michael Harris a little bit like we talked about, more opportunities for counting stats here in 2024.
I mean, I think he's already boosted up as much as you could justify, but I was avoiding him out of fear of him batting ninth. And, maybe he still will, but as we see the Braves regular lineup more, if he's consistently hitting sixth, I think that's a good indication he's going to do that. Sixth is a heck of a lot better than ninth.
Yeah, and I think the context would be like he had 539 plate appearances in 138 games last year. You can more easily project him for 600. You still, that's a lot less than a lot of players in his range, but it's better than 539.
And there is a lot of steam on Michael Harris right now, too. I've, heard some really smart people kind of propping him up throughout the industry. And he went in the middle of the second round in my TGFBI draft. He went 24th overall to the team that took Freddie Freeman in the first round. So there's some steam right now on Michael Harris, and it might be worth it.
He went 27th in mine. So
yeah.
Pretty close.
Yeah, he's getting propped up there. Some pitching notes here. Jack Flaherty made his Tigers debut. The velocity was up on all of his pitches. Fastball was up 1.5 miles per hour. The slider up 3 miles per hour compared to last season's velocity, but it was only one inning of work, so we'll monitor that throughout spring training. Nestor Cortez made his spring debut. Velocity was slightly up in his return from a shoulder injury last year, so that was nice to see. Yusei Kikuchi struck out 3 over 2 shutout innings. He debuted a new changeup grip, which was 4 miles per hour lower than last year. And we were talking beforehand, Kikuchi is always tinkering. I don't want him to change too much because he kind of figured something out that worked last year, but it's, something it's a new addition. So
he figured out the breaking balls last year. I think he found a combination of breaking balls that worked. Now it's, trying to finish off the arsenal, but he's, worked really, really hard. You remember Yusei Kikuchi's always been a really talented pitcher, but he was routinely posting ERAs over 5 for a couple of years. And I think he really figured something out last year. So I'm interested to see what this new changeup looks like. But like you said, he doesn't need to improve much more than he already has.
Yuri Perez struck out 3 over 1 2/3 innings of work. He debuted a new curveball grip. His curveball was down 6 miles per hour compared to last year, but the spin rate was up 137 RPM. So it's a new look. Probably sounds like it's more of like a loopy 12-16 type curveball thing, but hey man, Chris, get hyped. Yuri Perez.
So he only threw 3 of them. So we don't, and there was a lot of talk from catcher Kirk Casale and Skip Schumacher after the game where he only started working on this curveball grip a couple days ago, apparently. And it looked a lot better in the bullpen was what they said. Like they were really happy within the bullpen, so that's why he started working it into the game. He only threw 3 of them. His changeup and curveball, I think, command last year were probably the biggest weaknesses for Yuri Perez. So it's interesting to see that he is working on that. His curveball had the second highest whiff rate of any curveball in baseball last year.
54% whiff rate.
If you watch it and if you look at the scatter, the zone plots and all that, like, he didn't command it super well. He would get whiffs up in the zone, and I don't know how sustainable that is, but I don't know how I feel. The curveball was an effective pitch for him last year. So, does it being even slower, does that make it easier to pick up for opposing hitters? I don't know. We'll see. I think it's he's still a work in progress as much as we love him. He's 20 years old. We'll see what the data says over the next couple of starts, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Joe Musgrove allowed 4 more earned runs on Monday and saw that he was working on a new sweeper, but said he wasn't sure if he would use it in regular season games. I'm still not reacting or overreacting to Joe Musgrove not pitching well, but would like to see him do something good before the end of spring training, just coming back from the shoulder injury last year. There haven't been any velocity readings yet, but I think he'll be fine, but obviously we will continue to watch.
Yeah, I think even though we don't have StatCast data for these starts, I think we would have heard something if the ball wasn't coming out like it usually does for Joe Musgrove. We'll continue to monitor it this spring, but right now, other than the results themselves, I haven't seen any reason for alarm with him.
All right, let's take our final break. When we return, the head-to-head formats, head-to-head points, head-to-head categories. We'll talk about those right after this.
The madness doesn't just happen.
Yo, get ready!
And although it's marked on our calendars each year, it's built by moments of mayhem before.
And the crowd goes crazy!
And it begins to bubble long before it bursts. Sure, madness and March may go hand in hand, but it starts right here.
Welcome back in. Let's continue on with strategy talk. This time, head-to-head points. And if you're looking to get into fantasy baseball for the first time, or if you enjoy playing fantasy football, this is the format for you. You're going up against one other opponent. Some leagues, you could face multiple opponents at a time, but you just get fantasy points based on what your players do on the field, much like fantasy football. So on CBS head-to-head points leagues, use shallower starting lineups, one of each infield position, 3 outfielders, 1 utility bat, no corner or middle infielder. On the pitching side, you start 5 starting pitchers and 2 relief pitchers. In the past, head-to-head points leagues favored starting pitchers, and you'd see more of an emphasis on pitching early in drafts. Scott, what is your general strategy in this format, head-to-head points, and how has this changed at all in recent years?
So I've never. I get why people say it's the better format for pitching, but I think they go about that wrong and have for a long time. I don't see that as you need to sell out harder for high-end pitching. I see it more as you need to have a lot of pitching depth. Because this is the format where, like I said when we were talking about the Roto leagues, it's not like a pitcher with a so-so ERA and WHIP with so-so ratio stats is going to hurt you so much in this. If he's logging a lot of innings, which are worth 3 points apiece, meanwhile strikeouts are only worth half a point apiece, so they're not as valuable in points league as they are in Roto. You don't need those dominant high impact pitchers as much in this format. It's also the league where you're more likely to stream pitchers. We're more likely to go with 2 start options in a given week. We're more likely to play matchups. So you want a lot of pitching options. You want your bench to be mostly starting pitchers, but I don't think you should go into a head-to-head points draft thinking, oh, 2 of my first 3 picks or 3 of my first 4 picks need to be pitchers. I think that's the wrong way to approach it. I still think, particularly in this year's player pool, you're going to do more to distinguish yourself from the competition by going after those MVP caliber bats in the first 3 or 4 rounds. Not saying you can't take one pitcher if you like the value of one, but you should still mostly focus on bats. And part of the reason for that is usually in a head-to-head format, points leagues included, you're talking about smaller lineups. You're talking about no corner infield spot, no middle infield spot, just 3 outfield spots. So it's harder to get an advantage over your competition, and it's more necessary to. You have fewer ways to distinguish yourself from your opposition.
And
so that's
also
part of the reason why it makes sense to use your early round capital on the kind of bats that can do that.
And those two things are related, right? Like the fact that you want that pitching depth because you want to be able to take advantage of as many 2-start weeks as possible means that you need fewer question marks in your hitting lineup because you should be spending few. Like it's perfectly reasonable to go into a season in a head-to-head points league with 1 or no hitters on your bench, depending on what your team looks like. Because I think a good way to think about it is in a Roto, you're building your base for the season long. And so getting 280 inning aces or 200 inning aces, as rare as those are, sets you up really well for the whole season. And it can in a head-to-head points league if those guys are, getting 18 points per start or whatever. But your 2 aces are going to have 2-start weeks once every, 4 weeks is probably how it works. And that's valuable. Maybe once every 3 weeks is probably better. But either way, it's awesome when that happens. But your Spencer Strider can get outscored by someone else's Zach Eflin in any given week if Zach Eflin's got 2 starts. And he can get outscored in a 1-start week. But
yeah, much less pitcher, a pitcher much lower end than Zach Eflin even.
Yeah. So that's the it's just the way the scoring works, right? Like you can much more easily get an advantage from 2 aces in Roto than in head-to-head more consistently because they impact the whole season rather than each week.
And I just associate that strategy so much with my dad. We play in a head-to-head points league together. He will pick up any pitcher who has a 2-start week. He does not care who it is. He texts me at the beginning of every week. He says, my opponent's projected to have 3 more starts than me. I got to pick up 2-star pitchers.
Yeah. That's why I drafted 5 Sparks in our head-to-head auction last week because I'm going to have so many 2-start options. And some of them might even be good.
Some of them might even be good.
Occasionally.
Yeah. That is like, you could definitely take the strategy too far. I usually have 2 or 3 pitchers in a head-to-head points league that I'm basically never sitting, no matter how many starts they have. And it's really just the other 3, 4, or 2, 3, maybe 4 spots where you're swapping guys out based on matchups and 2-start status. But the point is, it is a strategy you're going to use a lot. When in Roto, I find it tends to do more harm than good because a fringy 2-start option in Roto is very likely to actually hurt your team's ERA and WHIP. It may do double the damage if they're making 2 starts.
And think about it logistically too, right? So Roto has deeper starting lineups. That means the waiver wire is worse. So the pitchers you're picking up for 2-start weeks are much worse.
Replacement level is much, much higher in a head-to-head points league.
Yeah. And to that point, again, it's the shallower the format, you need to have more spots that stand out and distinguish themselves. It allows you to take a little bit more risks as well, because again, that replacement value on the waiver wire is much better. Something else I feel that matters more in head-to-head formats as well, both head-to-head points and head-to-head categories, is consistency, weekly consistency. The problem with this is
it's not really a thing.
There's not really a way to track it, right? Like,
well, you can track it, but from what I understand, I remember Derek Carty did some analysis on this that I should go find and retweet, but there are inconsistent players, obviously, but for the most part, in the past, consistency is a thing. Predicting consistency, especially on a weekly basis, is basically impossible.
Yeah.
I think the kinds of contributions, certain kinds of contributions are more predictable from week to week than others. For instance, how much a player walks, how much a player strikes out.
Sure.
So I think if you're, and those tend to be the better players in head-to-head points leagues anyway, because walks by CBA standard scoring are worth 1 point each. Strikeouts for hitters are worth -0.5 a point. So I'm thinking in terms of like a Stephen Kwan, or I don't know, maybe like an Alex Bregman. I think they have a higher floor from week to week, but they also have, certainly Quan's has a lower ceiling. So if you do go with like a masher who doesn't walk much, a Luis Robert, let's say in a points league, I do think you're going to see more peaks and valleys from week to week. But I also think there are other reasons to say that's not the preferred format for Luis Robert other than consistency. I think given how many players you're starting, I don't worry so much when I'm assembling my team how consistent is this is going to be, because some guys are going to have down weeks, some guys are going to have good weeks, and it's rare that they're all going to have their good week at the same time.
It's a long season.
Yeah.
It's a long season. One name that comes to mind instantly is Randy Arozarena. I remember we did our outfield preview. I described him as inconsistently consistent, right? He goes on these crazy hot stretches. He goes through these cold spells. In Roto, at the end of the season, he winds up giving you what you want. But man, on a weekly basis, it could be kind of frustrating with Arozarena. The other thing is Rockies hitters too. I would say don't roster multiple Rockies hitters. That's especially true this year just because they're not very good. But whenever they're on the road, you don't want multiple Rockies in your lineup in a head-to-head format.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've learned.
As shallow as head-to-head formats seem to be, it's basically just Nolan Jones. So I think you're safe.
It's not
Nolan Jones is the only Rocky you definitely want to start at home at this point.
Yeah. Let's talk about the scoring format. Every website's points league scoring format is a little bit different. On CBS, plate discipline matters a lot for hitters. So you gain 1 point for walks, you lose half a point for strikeouts. And that is the biggest distinction between head-to-head points and Roto, at least on CBS. So hitters that gain value in this format, early on, Mookie Betts, Judge, Soto, Olsen, they get a little bit of a boost into the first round. Other names, Alex Bregman, Kyle Schwarber, Max Muncy, Yandy Diaz, Masataka Yoshida, JP Crawford, Steven Kwan, Jung-Hoo Lee, all guys expected to, again, have lower strikeout rates, usually good walk rates. I like to target hitters that hit in the top half of good lineups too, just because they get more opportunities, more plate appearances. And then pitchers that gain more in this format. You'll see ones that consistently go deep into starts and ones that provide quality starts. So you get I think it's a 5-point boost, right? On CBS, or 3-point boost.
3 points for a quality start. But every inning is worth 3 points.
Yeah. So guys like Logan Webb, Framber Valdez, Aaron Nola, Chris
You want me to go through the team again?
Go through the teams.
The head-to-head points team here. Okay, catchers, Adley Rutschman. Not that he's not the top catcher in Roto, but I think he's worth selling out for more in a head-to-head points league. Alternate is Keibert Ruiz, who never strikes out. First base, Yandy Diaz, of course. Great plate discipline. Honorable mention to Vinny Pasquantino, who's another 1-to-1 strikeout to walk guy. Second base, Ketel Marte, mostly because he's just not providing steals for Roto. Honorable mention, Jonathan India, good plate discipline guy. Third base, Alex Bregman, maybe the player with the single biggest difference between his Roto and points value. It's difference between him going in the third round in points leagues or like the seventh round in Roto. Honorable mention, Max Muncy, who might be the second biggest difference between his points league and Roto league value for as much as he walks. Shortstop, JP Crawford was great in points leagues last year. Corey Seager, honorable mention, though obviously he's great in both. Outfield, Juan Soto, of course, with his plate discipline. Kyle Schwarber, going to kill you in batting average in Roto, but that doesn't matter in points because it's not scored directly, and he walks a lot. And Steven Kwan, who hardly strikes out. Honorable mention to Jung-Hoo Lee, who we also don't think is going to strike out much. Rookie outfielder for the Giants. Starting pitcher, the volume guys, right? Logan Webb, Aaron Nola, Framber Valdez, Logan Gilbert, I think meets this description, though he's a little further down the rankings. And Mitch Keller fits this description. And then relievers, again, it's kind of stupid. Emmanuel Class A and Chris Paddock are who I chose for the all head-to-head points team. Chris Paddock representing all the Sparps, basically.
Yeah, and you hear us talk a lot about Sparps. Those are starting pitchers as relief pitchers. They're kind of a cheat code in this format. And the names that do fit that description, Cole Reagans, Michael King, Nick Pivetta, Ryan Pepio, Chris Paddock, Frankie Montas, Sean Manaea, Zach Littell, DL Hall, and one of Chris's new favorites, Cody Bradford.
Why are we taking shots? I don't understand.
You really? I'm not sure I've seen anyone other than you draft him.
I'm giving you credit.
Only in a head-to-head points league, only as a Sparp.
Hey man, I drafted Alex Wood in the Scott White Dynasty League.
He's
so
in a rotation.
who am I to talk? So let's wrap up with some head-to-head categories talk. We might go a little bit longer because I want to make sure to give this format some of its due as well. But to be honest,
I don't have an all head-to-head categories team, so that'll save us some time.
we could do a whole, I mean, it's the Wild West, man. It's Roto and head-to-head points. They had a baby and boom, head-to-head categories came out. Typically the standard 5x5, but I've seen people get crazy with it. 10x10 categories and so
That's
on.
too much. It's too much.
You face off against it. My favorite is the ones that have like complete games as a category. What are we doing? You face off against a team each week. Whoever ranks higher in each category wins that category. And there are different ways to keep track of standings too. So there's one win where if you beat your opponent 6-4, you win 6 categories, you lose 4, your record becomes 1-0.
The better format.
There's each category where if you win 6-4 in week 1, your record is 6-4. If you lose 4-6 in week 2, your record becomes 10-10. It sounds like Chris prefers the one win, Scott.
The better format by far.
I kind of like the each category.
I will
different.
quote Don Toretto in the, 2001 classic Fast and Furious. Doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning's winning. And that's the way. This is like saying, oh, we should decide who goes to the playoffs based on run differential. No, we shouldn't. You play to win the game. All right, this like, oh, I'm going to get 6/10 of a win. No, you get one win, you get one loss, and that is the way we play sports in America.
Rub some dirt on it, kid.
There you go.
Exactly.
The standard lineup for this format, by the way, is one of each infield position, 3 outfielders, 2 utility spots, no corner, no middle. And on the pitching side, you get 2 starting pitchers, 2 relief pitchers, and 4 just pitcher spots. So, Scott, this allows for a lot of flexibility. And again, it's what kind of makes head-to-head categories the Wild West, because yes, you can you could stream starting pitchers, you can have some aces in your lineup, you can have a few closers, but you could also just have like setup guys and middle relievers that you just plug into those pitcher spots, and they're just giving you something every day. It might not be a good thing, but you could get strikeouts, you could wind up with like a lucky win. So it allows for more flexibility, and it's interesting.
It is interesting, and I think your approach to the league changes a lot based on your particular setup. I think head-to-head categories leagues, for instance, are the most likely to have daily lineup changes. And so how you make up your roster is going to make a big difference. How waivers are run in a league with daily lineup changes makes a big difference in how you make out your roster too. But yeah, in theory, if it is a daily lineup league, you want more relievers on your roster so that you can swap them in when your starting pitchers have days off and maximize your output in the pitching categories that way. But let's say it's not. Let's say it's just a weekly lineup league like we're used to playing with in the other formats. It's still probably worth carrying more relievers because what your team's ERA and WHIP for the week is going to be highly, highly unpredictable. It becomes more predictable if you have more relievers who can help control it. And I think there's a higher threshold that a starting pitcher has to meet to be worth putting in a head-to-head categories lineup at all, which is true in Roto too, to an extent, but I think even more so in a head-to-head categories league. On that, in that vein of you're breaking the Roto categories down into individual weekly competitions, I also think a jack of all trades type hitter, somebody who's going to give you C+ to B- across the board, C+ to B- production across the board. I think it's less valuable in a head-to-head categories league. I think you want to aim more for hitters who make a high, more predictable from week to week impact at a specific thing. You want extreme base dealers. You want extreme power hitters, because you can more reliably count on winning those categories from week to week if you know you have guys who do a lot of that thing, rather than in a Roto league, you just need it to balance out over the course of a season.
And Scott mentioned this, Chris, that usually head-to-head categories leagues are daily lineups. So how does that change things for you? Are you more likely to take guys that might be in a platoon? I mean, if you're worried about Josh Lowe being in a platoon, maybe he's someone that gains more value in this format. I don't know that you want his platoon mate on your bench like a Johnny DeLuca or something like that, but is there anything that you could see doing differently in a daily lineup league?
I think that's where, for hitters, you can get a small edge. It's kind of what the Rays already do in running their actual team. If you really are capable of keeping track of this and being anal retentive about it and updating your lineup every day and tracking, okay, Josh Lowe's out of the lineup, I got to get him out. Like, you can gain an edge, but that's kind of tough, right? Like, let's say you got a Thursday.
That's a
lifestyle.
That's
That's another job. One.
Yeah.
And I hate these leagues. Just to be perfectly clear, I hate daily lineup leagues. I refuse to play in them. I will never play in a daily lineup league again.
Too.
I would rather jump off the roof than play in a but it's also like, let's say Josh Lowe's playing at 7 and you find out at 2:00 that he's not in the lineup on a Thursday. If your alternatives had day games, then you're kind of screwed anyway. Right. So I think you can gain an edge that way. I think it's a bad way to play fantasy. You're not really rewarding building a good team. You're rewarding whoever's the most anal retentive about updating theirs. And I don't think that's ideal. I think it works better it's easier to do on the pitching side because when your starters are or are not going to be starting, having some relief pitchers who are really good to slide in there. I think that's where it becomes more helpful.
And people get crazy with streaming too in daily lineup leagues. I think if your league uses daily lineups, you have to have a weekly maximum of waiver wire additions. Whether it's, I think 3 to 4 is probably fair. Maybe you want to stretch it out to 5, but anything more than that, people just go crazy with the streaming just later on in the week. And I don't love that aspect of it.
Daily lineup changes with daily streaming is okay. Whoever has the most free time is going to win this league, basically, which, people who play in those leagues, they swear by them. Okay. I'm not here to kill your buzz, but
yeah, I've realized we're alienating our entire head-to-head categories.
I just don't have the attention span for it, but God bless you if you do.
No, I understand. Like, people want to be involved, right? It's the same way of, if you ran a real life baseball team, right? You're making the lineup every day. You're going out there. You're pitchers in your lineup.
But
and stuff.
for it for you to feel like you're having your competitive urges satiated, you have to be able to find 11 other people who are legitimately willing to do that. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're not really challenging yourself.
Yeah, let's talk about punting categories because this is a format where you could definitely do it. I think we can kind of work in, if you guys want to mention the Marmol strategy. I don't know if it's something that is still viable at this point anyway, but for those who don't know, that used to be you have like 2 aces on your team or 2 pitchers that give you innings. And then outside of that, it's mostly relievers. You're trying to dominate saves, you're trying to dominate ratios and just barely meet that innings requirement for the week. But it does allow you to kind of punt and dominate what you can dominate. Basically.
It requires self-control is the biggest thing about the Marmol strategy. Is it can work, but what you can't do is take your 2 starting pitchers and they get to the 12th round and be like, ooh, I like that value at start. And then you have to because the idea is you're going to dominate hitting categories because you're not going to invest in pitcher. And then you're going to take a bunch of middle relievers at the end of the draft, a couple of closers, and just dominate ratios, dominate saves at a low investment. And you have to really stick with it. And you have to be willing to churn those guys, and you have to be willing to play that daily lineup game. And it's hard, and it does not guarantee success, but it can work in a head-to-head categories league. It's just, I don't know if I've ever really had the discipline to pull it off.
Do you think there should be a weekly innings minimum? Because if there isn't,
Absolutely.
then theoretically every team could just use relievers. So like 25, 30 plus, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like in theory, if you had no mini innings minimum, you could just have one pitcher on your roster.
Right.
You could just have Devin Williams and then a bunch of guys who are in AAA and win ERA and whip every week. Like that, it's you obviously need. You don't need. You can play however you want. You should have checks and balances in your rule set, and this is true of Roto and head to head in different ways. In Scott White's Dynasty League, there's a maximum of 9 starting pitchers you can have on your roster. Like you need ways to balance your league to create, to enforce competitiveness. And I think innings minimums, waiver wire regulations on how many players you can swap in and out of your roster, I think those are all a key to making head-to-head categories more competitive.
And I should have mentioned this earlier because in Roto leagues, there is typically an innings minimum that you have to meet throughout the season, whether that's 900 innings, 1,000 innings. It's just so that you don't just basically do this and run out a bunch of relievers on your team. So there is a minimum of, you got to have obviously a decent amount of starts throughout the year to get to that 900 or 1,000 inning minimum in a Roto league. Any other thoughts, Scott, on like punting categories? We mentioned it a little bit in Roto. I think if you're going to punt an offensive category, a hitting category, like steals makes the most sense to do, but it's like so many of the best hitters now also steal bases. So I don't know how viable it is to even try doing that anymore.
Yeah, I think steals made the most sense. And punting in general makes more sense in head-to-head categories than in Roto, particularly if it's scored the way Chris prefers, where no matter how much you win by in a given week, you get a single win out of it. Then, yeah, I mean, I think it's easier to build a winning team without steals, potentially even without saves, though you're going to have to figure out another way to keep your ERA and WHIP under control. The fact it's scored week by week, I think, makes it a little more plausible because you're going to see more dramatic swings from one week to the next in the ratio stats, especially. But like you're saying, there are so many more steals to be found now, and the stolen base, like what is a good stolen base stealer now, has more stolen bases than he did 2-3 years ago. And actually, this is, I know we're not talking about head-to-head points leagues before, but I think this is worth bringing up in a head-to-head points league context, because we were talking about how in categories leagues versus points leagues, okay, the base stealers get pushed up in categories leagues. They're necessary when you can score in other ways in points leagues. Well, I do still think the big base stealers are more valuable in categories than points leagues, but now the big base stealers steal more bases. So it adds up to a higher point total than it did before. And you'd be surprised how well Nico Horner, Ellie De La Cruz, even as much as he struck out, you'd be surprised how many points they scored. There's less difference in their points in Roto value than you might think.
Anything else to add on head-to-head categories? Because it is the Wild West, so I feel like there's a bunch of different routes you could take it and strategies and discussions. Anything else?
Nothing is coming to mind, but I'm sure we could do a whole podcast on it.
I'm sure we can. We're going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.